Hello, welcome to the Craig Dallas Rice Show. Today I have Roger Weinreich on the show to talk to us about the anti-nuclear movement and nuclear weapons. And he's also the owner of the Good Fortune Jewelry and Pawn here in Keene, New Hampshire, as well as a band member of Earth Colony. And we'll learn more about that too during the show. First of all, let me welcome Roger. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me in your studio. Love being here.
Thank you very much. Hey, let's go ahead and kick it off about the anti-nuclear movement. How did you get involved, and what have you done in that realm?
Yeah, I think my involvement began when I was a kid on some level during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So during that time, you may know it was before your time perhaps, but there was great fear that Cuba, who had missiles, would be able to attack the U.S. and we would be annihilated pretty quickly, like within 20 minutes if we lived in New York, within 23 seconds if you lived in Miami, Florida.
Right.
So that affected me, that sort of fear factor when I was like a 12-year-old kid.
Absolutely. I remember those days. It wasn't before my time.
Okay, there we go.
I was one of those kids that had to get under the school desk, as a drill.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I have a few slides. Let's take a look at slide number 1. We'll take a look at that in a minute. The Polaris sub, right?
Yeah.
The Polaris sub was capable of launching missiles at sea.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to take a look at that in just a second. There we go. So that's actually a shot of a missile going out of a Polaris. Now, let's also take a look and see the ranges from Cuba during that Cuban.
Okay.
They were reporting that the Cuban Missile Crisis, that Cuba was able to launch the Soviet missiles and reach all these places in the U.S., even Mexico. I mean, I don't know why they would bomb Mexico, but maybe because they're friends of ours or something. Yeah. And also duck and cover. We talked about that. Let's see that video on duck and cover. It's quite a old video, but
Cool. I'd love to see that.
We must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover. This family knows what to do, just as your own family should. They know that even a thin cloth helps protect them. Even a newspaper can save you from a bad burn. But the most important thing of all is to duck and cover yourself, especially where your clothes do not cover you.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash? Duck and cover. Duck and cover. Duck.
it seems humorous to me to watch that now, to see people, using newspaper to protect themselves against a nuclear flash.
Yeah.
But at the same time, people were scared. You tell us about that. You told me a story about you as a kid. You were scared to even go to school or do your homework.
Well, I went to school and I wasn't so actively scared. I was pretty much accepting, okay, this could be the end of the world.
Right.
But in that process of accepting that, I decided to stop doing my homework. So for that whole week of the crisis, I didn't do my homework. And my teachers were really upset about that. And I explained, well, look, let's get through this week or two and see how it goes. But why should I do my homework, if we're all going to die? And I used to think about, if my parents came home, we'd all run down in the basement and get some milk and some food. But this was also the time where we stopped doing the duck and cover because the teachers told us, very sort of covertly that, hey, this is not really effective with nuclear bombs.
Right.
So that was, I think, the point in my life when I started to say, well, what are these things? So I was 12. So that's where I sort of got on the path towards nuclear disarmament, you could say.
Right. And so this, by the time you were a young man, and you were really getting involved in the anti-nuclear movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I got involved with a nonviolent pacifist organization located in Voluntown, Connecticut, called New England Committee for Nonviolent Action, who had formed in the 50s to protest the Polaris missile launchings. And they felt the missile was a very destabilizing nuclear missile because it could be parked anywhere in the oceans of the world and would be undetectable, which makes sense if you're looking to attack somebody or whatever, but it was a big step from having missiles siloed in fixed positions around the Earth.
Right.
So that was my first taste as an 18, 19-year-old working with a group of much older people who were very committed to abolishing nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. And didn't you travel around like and educate people about this?
Yeah, so at that time I traveled on what were called peace caravans. I actually came to Keene, New Hampshire, I think in 1969, spoke at the Unitarian Church, and our focus was also on the war in Vietnam, just kind of looking at that and assessing different options that people had as young participants, either to be in the war, to be a conscientious objector, to consider not going into the war. But the nuclear disarmament thing really came up big for me at that time, and that led me into future work in that field.
Right, right. You really were involved. I mean, I've protested here and there against nuclear, for peace and things, but I've never had that level of commitment. So, I mean, you were with a group of people that were really, really committed. Do they still exist today?
They exist in a slightly different shape and form, but the group was very inspiring. They were made up of people much older than me, needless to say. But
you were very young.
I was young, but there were 30
out,
to 70-year-olds in the organization, and that led me in my late 20s to get involved with the National Nuclear Weapons Freeze campaign. And I became a fundraiser for that organization by raising money for the projects, but also by raising awareness. So I became a concert promoter, kind of at a young age. And one of the great shows we put on was a combined show with Paul Simon and Joan Baez in Boston. And that was really inspiring because they're both very inspiring people, obviously. Right. So I got that added benefit as a musician of meeting some cool musicians.
Yes, yes. So they were committed to anti-nuclear stance as well.
Yep, and at this time in history, in the very early 80s, the focus was on reducing the arsenals, and it was very successful. Like both the U.S. and Soviet Union reduced their arsenals in direct response to pressure from senators and individuals and groups like ours, and that was great. And people took a real good stance on it, saying, hey, we might want nuclear weapons, but let's decrease the arsenal by a third, which we actually did at that time.
There is a video that I'd like to show now. It's concerned with the way that we respond or could potentially respond to a nuclear threat, and because there's so many of the nuclear weapons out there, that it's a real danger. I think you would agree with that. There's a real danger of just even an accident happening. So if we could take a look at that final clip.
Stop. Just stop. Listen. Nuclear weapons. Bad, right? Neutrons hit a radioactive core and boom. An explosion hotter than the core of the sun that could instantly level half of Manhattan. We'd be crazy to keep these things hanging around, but we do. Thousands of them. They're stuffed into submarines, bunkers, and underground silos in the US heartland. And get this, hundreds of these cosmic-scale, world-ending weapons are always on, always ready to fire, and can be airborne within minutes. The military calls it prompt launch, we call it hair trigger alert. It should be called an accident waiting to happen. The idea is that if we think we see incoming nukes, we can get ours off the ground before they're destroyed. Use them or lose them, right? Except that's nuts. Leaving aside the morality of vaporizing people, hair trigger is a recipe for accidental nuclear war. The system relies on knowing when we're under attack. Satellites and radar detect something, the military puzzles it over, and the president has about 10 minutes to decide if the warning is real and whether to launch. The biggest decision in history in the blink of an eye. But satellite and radar can be wrong. They've been wrong before, and we've been lucky that missiles haven't been fired by mistake. Even generals, the who's who of our military, think the most likely nuclear war is an accidental one. That is 100% insane. Accident and nuclear war don't belong in the same sentence. They shouldn't even be in the same language. The president can and should change this, but needs political support to make it happen. You can help. Let our leaders know enough gambling with our lives. Let's take our nukes off hair trigger alert.
Yeah, that's for some people. I'm sure it's going to be educational. I mean, I've always heard that an accidental, something that a mistake could set off World War III with nuclear, holocaust, basically. I think you know of an instance, don't you, where this almost happened?
Yeah, there are actually several well-documented cases of near launch, and one of them happened in the Soviet Union. There was a Soviet Union sub-commander who had received complete clearance on the launch. The missiles were getting ready to go. Everything was operational and go, and he had literally seconds before the launch, shut everything down, which he could do. At the moment in time, the crew was very upset and concerned, but it turned out to be a malfunction electronically within the system. And he's one of the biggest heroes in the world. He's little known, but again, you can Google him, you can find out all about what happened.
Yeah.
And just the fact that the more weapons there are, the more countries that have them, the more missing nuclear devices there are, which those are again documented when the Soviet Union broke up. There are several devices just gone astray, small devices, but still nuclear, that the likelihood increases with the more people having these weapons. Mm-hmm. So even if it was an accident, God forbid, it could still happen. It could still put in motion a stream of events that would lead to a full-out nuclear exchange between all the countries with weapons. Which reminds me of something that's very big in the world, and folks may have heard about this, but last year around this time, the UN finally adopted a resolution to ban and abolish nuclear weapons in the world. And this had begun in 1949. This is a big thing, right after the weapons were used for the first time. And the focus was to basically treat weapons the same as chemical weapons, landmines, anti-personnel devices, which the UN has successfully abolished, and all member nations have agreed to not use chemical weapons, etc. The challenge with this one is everybody signed on last year, all the member nations, with the exception of the 9 nations that have nuclear weapons. Some of whom said, well, this is not the right way to do it. But those nations who have signed on believe this is the way to do it, that it'll take a global sort of push from the world to eliminate them. So that's a very, very good sign, Greg.
Yeah, it is. It is a good sign. I have to say that, the nations that have the nuclear weapons, there's no denying that they feel that they have more power with them.
Yeah.
And so that's quite a obstacle in the way to the path of total, denuclearization, weapon-wise.
Yeah.
However, I do believe there's hope. I do. I think that eventually there might be enough people that that will stand up for this idea of getting rid of nuclear weapons. That
Yep.
There'll be a tipping point at some point. Although, the old saying of power only concedes the power is time and time again it seems to be true. So we have to organize. In fact, that last video clip was saying that the president, whoever's in power, in order to get Congress and elected officials on board, needs support from organizations and individuals. They have to have the people behind them, so to speak. So are you hopeful that that
very
will
hopeful.
happen?
Like I believe it happens. I believe we
Right.
go one of two ways. We either learn how to live with them, which means we live without them, or if we keep them around, I can't see us having them for another 100 years or 1,000 years, or even 10 years actually.
Yeah.
And the state of California broke ground just a few days ago. They put forward a bill that was passed to have the president no longer have the right to first strike launch. In other words, right now our military is still set up that the president, under the right circumstances, can launch a preeminent attack before there's been a launch against us. So we want to remove that from the table. And these are big steps because a lot of people in the know realize that the weapons no longer keep us safe. Like they don't keep us out of smaller wars. Countries, there are several countries on the world now who could have nuclear weapons who are electing to not develop them because they know it's a waste of money. And talk about a waste of money. Imagine you never use these and we just buy and rebuild. But we're really on the path to getting rid of them. And one of the really good signs from my perspective is people in the industry, and this includes people within the military, understand that this is the right time because now with our methods of surveillance, both on-site visit and satellite, you can really detect anybody who is building one or storing one or siloing one. The subs are a little harder to detect, but with everybody's participation, and it may take one country stepping up boldly and saying, we're going to lead the way, we're not going to let ours go until you do, but they can be let go at the same time incrementally, which is what happened during the freeze in the 80s. Countries began to back down the arsenals. We could absolutely do it again and back down to zero. It would take us several years, but it could be done. So very much looking forward to that.
Well, safety, the likelihood of an accident happening, like you said, if we have these for prolonged periods, the likelihood of an accident is just like, your house burning down. I mean, if the house has been there 1 year, probably not very much likely it's going to burn down. But if it's there 1,000 years, there's a likelihood that eventually it's going to catch on fire.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to be playing with matches at some point, right? And it's costly too. It's also a drain on our economy. Not to, let's don't discount, needless death and destruction of almost all life, on the planet would be affected if there was a nuclear, war.
Right. Yeah.
So we have everything to gain by getting rid of these things.
Yeah.
But obviously, we have to have people feel like, they're not giving up their safety net either.
Right. And that's the biggest step, to convince ourselves that we're better off without them. And again, you brought up the subject of what happens if they get used. That's beyond most people's reasonable mind to evaluate and want to think about, because there's not much that would happen in the aftermath. But getting to that point of awareness where we look at the situation and we say very pragmatically, okay, they cost us money, that's a big waste. What else do they cost us? And I think they cost us sleep at night on some level, meaning the sort of fear factor, the trauma that's sort of induced like unconsciously by the fact of us walking around with a gun to our head. And I'll do this.
Right.
I mean, I'll go like that because figuratively and literally, Keene, for example, is targeted. That's also well known because of some production companies that have lived here. So
Right.
if Keene is targeted, a small town like this, we're essentially telling parents, hey, it's like you're sending your kids off to school every day with a gun strapped to their head. Now, the gun might not be a mechanical gun held by somebody, but it's actually controlled by somebody 8,000 miles away.
Right.
And none of us would let our kids walk around with a gun pointed towards our head. So just the fact that we have these weapons pointed towards us in a sort of, part of my language, pre-suicidal stance is concerning.
Right.
So again, just talking about it like we're doing, putting light on the subject, normalizing it, because it's a very normal thing, even though it's far away, is probably a good step.
Yeah, I think one of the it's just like anything else that whatever you get used to, you don't really address it very often. Like I don't really come up. This doesn't come up in conversation every day for people that I'm talking to, but it's an ever-present you have to be aware that this is hanging over our heads, and it does have some effect on, how you think about the world and how your expectations. I think if everyone would just think about this a little more, take some action, support the groups, get involved. Hey, if nothing else, Google anti-nuclear movement and see if there's a spot or a group that you think that you could feel comfortable with being involved in, and the more people on board, like I said, at some point there's going to be a tipping point.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's happening within the military too, because people in the military who are tasked with defending us definitely want to get something off the table that doesn't work. And I've been in silos. I've talked to silo operators, and they'll do their job diligently, but they know there's a better way to do it too.
Right. Well, I certainly hope that that this discussion will grow and become much more a part of our daily discussions. There's so much going on in the world. Kim Jong-il even recently was testing some sort of missiles, and obviously they weren't nuclear warheads, but but I think he's been the latest one to bring this to our attention, right? And with some of the reactions I had heard and seen from Trump, I think that scared me a little bit. I thought we might actually be headed into some sort of showdown, like the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 50s. Somehow maybe that will work out for the greater good and make people aware. Right.
I think that could happen. I mean, most people know that there's really no such thing as a protracted or a short duration or limited nuclear war. It might be short in duration. It might take a couple of hours, but there's a tipping point that goes the other way when we step into something that we really don't have experience with.
Right.
So, so dropping 1 or 2 bombs is different than sending off a whole fleet of missiles around the world, fully armed. So.
Well, obviously, the danger is that it escalates and
Yeah.
gets out of. I mean, I don't even think there's really such a thing as a controlled nuclear war. I mean, I know they use some smaller nuclear. Some in Iraq, I think they use some sort of depleted uranium or something like that. But when you talk about the missiles, the interballistic missiles, I mean, just a few of them, I'm sure would put all kinds of radioactive debris into the air, travel all around the globe, and people are going to suffer from that.
Yeah,
it's a human rights that we shouldn't have to have, that kind of thing done to us as human beings.
Yeah, and if we're looking for minimizing collateral damage in any kind of warfare, this is the extreme version of not doing that. This means everybody gets involved, even countries that have no interest in participating. So that just doesn't seem fair, pardon my language.
Right.
And even if you look at the idea of, well, let's work to do things that keep the country together, keep young lives growing. Just like folks focus on global warming, understandably saying, hey, here's something that can knock the species out or affect us.
Right.
So nuclear war, nuclear winter is the short version of that, which could happen very quickly. So let's get that one off the table.
Yeah, let's not let that happen, that's for sure. Hey, we are coming to the end of our time here. Let me ask you just to maybe explain just a little bit how Earth Colony is promoting some good things, and how can you become a part of Earth Colony, the band Earth Colony?
Oh, good. So one of the missions for Earth Colony is to have people join the band. So the easiest thing, rather than me giving you the whole song and dance, is folks can go to earthcolony.com. It's our website. And right there they'll read about how they can submit a song to the band, and the band will play their song. So people who are writing songs now from around the world are sending us songs to do this, and it's a fun thing, but for us it gives us a chance as we start to travel around the world as a band to have band members in different countries step up on stage with us. So,
that's awesome.
So we're looking to shrink the borders, you could say, a little bit.
That is totally awesome. And you're going to actually do a song for us.
Yes.
And can you tell us just maybe a blurb about the song itself?
Yeah, so this is not an Earth Colony song. This is a cover song, very popular by Barry McGuire back in the 60s. It's called Eve of Destruction.
Yes.
And again, people have been singing about the destruction of the world for probably ever, hell or high water, however it manifests. But now that it's in sort of human hands, the potential to do it, we want to address it. So this song is pertinent. The band's taken a little twist, so I'll play our band's version, which at the end becomes a little hopeful, we like to think.
And we'll go ahead and get set up, and I'm going to do the drums on this song.
Good job
the
doing the drums.
desk drums, yes.
I'll
All right.
go get my guitar.
Great. All right, thank you, Roger.
Yeah. You can practice the drums if you want. Right?
Do a little drum roll.
Make sure we're in tune here.
Sure.
I think I'm in the right
Whenever
position.
you're ready, yeah.
Right there is good. The Eastern world, it is exploding with violence flaring and bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting, and you don't believe in war. But what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River, it now has bodies floating. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friends, oh, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. When the buttons push, there'll be no running away, and there'll be no one to save with our world in her grave. So take a look around you, boys. It's bound to scare you, boys. And you're telling me over and over and over again, my we're taking back control, and you only know it now. So look around you, boy, who's by your side, and look around, my friends, and who's by our side. Where we won't let it go, no, until we get what we've wanted. You know we won't let it go until we get what we need. Truth and freedom. Truth and freedom. How about some truth, love, and freedom? Right now. Right now. Something's telling me we're on the eve of destruction. Something's telling me we're on the eve of something. Something's telling me we're all on the eve of destruction. Something's telling me we're on the eve of something good. Of something good.
Right, man. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Hey, by the way, Earth Colony, earthcolony.com. You can find out how to get involved and join the band. Like, I'm their drummer now.
All right.
See how easy that was? Hey, listen, I just want to remind you guys, my show, the Craig Dallas Rice Show premieres. It starts showing for the new episode every week on 9 o'clock on Saturdays. And throughout the week, you can check the schedule with CheshireTV.com, or is it .org? Well, hey, you got me. Just Google it and find out how you can see it during the week if you miss it on Saturday. And I want to thank Roger Weinreich for being on the show and teaching us something about
Thank you.
the danger that we face and how we can help solve it. Until next time, rock on, folks.